The powerful and sophisticated cyber attacks coming wave after wave. Internet users in at least 6 countries, but mostly here in the U.S., unable to load popular websites like Twitter, Netflix, Amazon, PayPal, and a long list of others.
What we know is that a cyber criminal group or a group of people created the opportunity where they had web traffic and they funneled all of that traffic at a particular company, DYN.
The attack was aimed at Dyne, a tech company based in New Hampshire that serves as an internet switchboard and allows people to connect to websites. It crippled DNS, or domain name servers, the so-called address book for the internet, essentially overloading it. The hack will cost major corporations dearly. It's too early to tell who's responsible. Some say, based on the methods and magnitude of the attack, it may be Russian in origin. But one senior U.S. intelligence official and other cyber experts tell NBC News this is a classic case of internet vandalism and likely not state-sponsored.
There are a host of adversaries that can launch these types of attacks, and we've got to make sure that we have a resilient network that is able to withstand these types of probes.
With the largest outage in the Northeast, a second wave spread west. Tens of millions couldn't check their banking accounts or log on to local news. In Los Angeles, Epic Interactive sent employees home. With PayPal and Twitter down, nobody could work.
I think we should be concerned because, it's one thing when there's an attack. It's another thing when for an entire day goes by and it seems like the company involved can't fix it.
With Dyne saying it is fighting multiple, very well-planned attacks, the case of cyber warfare comes just before our election. Tonight, experts say we are in uncharted territory.
While this attack did not target individuals, it brought down websites temporarily that millions of us use every day. It appears no critical personal or financial information was lost, but it shows how vulnerable servers can be. And experts say every time security firms make a fix, thieves find another way in. Lester.
Miguel Almaguer tonight, thank you. And joining us now is NBC News cybersecurity analyst Sean Henry. You just saw him in Miguel's story. He's president and chief security officer of CrowdStrike. Sean, no indications where this is coming from or what it could be related to, but with our election just over 2 weeks away, would there be anything to prevent an attack like this on November 8th or any day to potentially disrupt the flow of information?
Well, Lester, this appears to be a very complex botnet made up of hundreds of thousands or even millions of computers. Attackers that have used home appliances and devices like IP-connected cameras, security cameras. It's very difficult to detect these types of attacks, and an attacker with this type of powerful weapon could certainly use it. As it relates to our election process, I think the distributed nature of our system doesn't render that specifically susceptible, but attackers will continue to use this device inevitably or until they're detected and stopped or the botnet itself can be disrupted. Lester.
All right, Sean Henry, thank you.
Officials in the Department of Homeland Security, the military, and the intelligence community tell NBC News the U.S. government is gearing up for an unprecedented effort to protect the country on Election Day. According to multiple intelligence sources, U.S. officials are deeply concerned about and preparing for some sort of cyber chaos next week. Current and former officials say an attack on critical infrastructure, including the U.S. power grid, is one of 3 worst-case concerns. One highly placed intelligence source told NBC News, "Your vote is safe, you just might not have any lights." Also on the worry list, a large-scale denial of service. In other words, part of the Internet goes down. Or a cyber attack to disable communications and transportation in swing states. But intelligence sources and a senior Obama national security official tell NBC News they believe a more likely scenario is that hackers from Russia or elsewhere will try to manipulate Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms to sow confusion and chaos. A parallel concern is an 11th-hour release of fake documents implicating one of the candidates in an explosive way without time for it to be fact-checked. And it isn't just the Russians. Multiple intelligence and law enforcement officials tell NBC News the concern is just as much about non-state actors, hackers, political activists, and criminal mischief makers. While multiple intelligence officials tell NBC they have no specific warning about an Election Day attack, they also say they consider the massive and sophisticated Internet disruption last month a rehearsal or an inspiration for the real thing.
The dying DDoS activity that occurred on the 21st of October has definitely been seen by many in cybersecurity field as potentially a drill associated with a real event. It had all the signs of what you would consider a drill to be.
Intelligence sources tell NBC News that the United States has communicated red lines to the Russians through diplomatic and back channels regarding just how seriously any cyber attack would be viewed by the U.S. The president has been briefed about his options if there is some sort of cyber attack. And I should say, Lester, all the experts we talked to say the public should be comforted by these preparations, including the ones they hope never to have to use.
Well, these are disturbing scenarios, but let's get down to brass tacks. My vote, your vote. Is there any fear that the tally could somehow be tampered with?
So the intelligence sources we talked to said they believe it is highly unlikely that the tallies can be tampered with.
All right, Cynthia, thanks very much.
And now to an NBC News exclusive. The U.S. government is launching a massive effort to protect the vote on Tuesday amid fears of a cyber attack aimed at throwing this election into chaos. Multiple U.S. intelligence sources say the government is concerned about attacks by Russian or other hackers aimed at causing confusion as Americans head to the polls. Joining us now is Thomas Hicks, chair of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Clearly, this has been a part of the conversation I think a lot of voters have had regarding these hacks, whether it falls on one candidate or the other. The notion that right before this election, a flood of information could be released. Is it rational for us to be worried as voters?
I think that voters should have confidence in the system that it will perform well. Most of the voters have already made their minds up. There's been nearly 33 million people who've early voted. The Election Assistance Commission deals with more of the voting machines and the process itself. So we've been working with the FBI, DHS, to inform them of what the states do, because the states actually run the elections themselves. It's not a federal government mandate.
Well, it was last month we saw that internet disruption. People were wondering if this was some type of dress rehearsal. The former member of the Department of Homeland Security Emergency Readiness Team had this to say about last month's incident. Let's play that.
The dying DDoS activity that occurred on the 21st of October has definitely been seen by many in cybersecurity field as potentially a drill associated with a real event. It had all the signs of what you would consider a drill to be.
So obviously, if you're testing a drill, you have something in mind as the full run of whatever dubious act you want to carry out. What's your reaction to the idea that that was a drill?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that was a drill,
Okay.
if it is true or not. But I would say that election officials have been planning for a number of years for this election. And so they are contingency plans that they put in place. For instance, I was in California this past June for their primary, and the power went out in the county office, but they had a backup generator that kicked in. And so we don't know all the scenarios that might happen. For instance, 4 years ago, Hurricane Sandy came up the East Coast a week before the election. And so we have to be prepared. We can't be prepared for everything, but we should be vigilant, and voters should have confidence to go out to the polls and cast their ballots.
All right. Thomas Hicks, chair of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. We'll see what happens in the next few days, sir. Thank you so much for your insight. Greatly appreciate it.
Enough that the FBI sent out a warning to state governments in August, and the DHS has incident response teams in place for election night. But after speaking to experts, the threat is low. However, there is a need for more secure voting machines. Just this summer, the FBI said they had evidence of international hackers targeting voter registration systems in several states. It's a breach that's raised security questions ahead of tomorrow's election.
DHS and FBI have noticed some irregularities in various states' voter registration databases, and that's completely different than the voting computers.
In Illinois and Arizona, hackers were able to access some voter information, but Chris Thomas, a strategist with a cybersecurity firm in Columbia, said the information gathered would not have been able to change an election.
There is a small danger that somebody could change the rolls, delete people from the rolls, add new people, but again, it would have to be done in such a way that you'd be able to create enough new votes to change a national election, and do it in a way that nobody can notice.
DHS is now working with many states, including Maryland, to scan computer systems and identify any vulnerabilities. Linda Lamone with the State Board of Elections said they also reached out to the FBI following the two breaches to see if any more could be done to enhance their security.
We do routine scanning of all of our systems, and we're working with the Department of Homeland Security, who is also doing scanning of our systems. We found nothing.
States must also work to protect their election machines. Thomas says it is possible to change someone's vote, but that's only if a hacker has physical access to the system.
You can manipulate the vote, the tally that the machine is collecting, whether that's vote flipping or changing the vote after the fact or changing the ballot so that different people show up. All these things are possible or have been shown possible on various different machines. But in all those cases, you always need to have physical access to the system.
Aside from that, there's no way for hackers to change the data because none of the systems are put online.
Election computers are not supposed to be connected to the internet. The election management systems that manage those systems are not supposed to be connected to the internet. And even if they were, we're talking about 9,000 different jurisdictions in the United States, all with different types of technology, different types of voting computers. And so there's a large, varied ecosystem of computers that somebody would have to try to compromise and do it in such a way that nobody notices.
Something, again, that's extremely unlikely, and with polls set to open soon, the state feels comfortable with the systems they have in place.
It's as secure as we can get them.
Even so, Thomas says more needs to be done in the future to protect the integrity of elections.
Unfortunately, we only talk about this like every 4 or sometimes every 8 years, and it's been an ongoing problem ever since we started using voting computers. And I think we really need to have a national conversation on November 9th so that in 4 years we're ready for the next election.
Bottom line, officials are confident that no breach would affect the outcome of the election, and Maryland officials want to stress that their systems have been rigorously tested and proven to be secure.
Cybersecurity and your vote. U.S. authorities are on high alert this morning in case there are any actions, any antics anybody trying to hack into the election. And here is ABC's investigative correspondent Brian Ross with much more on this. Good morning, Brian.
Well, good morning, Robin. The watch is on this morning as nearly every state has asked the federal government for help to protect its voting system from being hacked. But the fact that each state, for the most part, has its own somewhat antiquated, not always internet-friendly way of doing things is probably the best protection against the final outcome somehow being affected by a cyber attack, or as one candidate has claimed, rigged.
The system is rigged. System is rigged, folks. It's all rigged. We're in a rigged system.
The system is totally rigged and broken.
Cybersecurity experts have long warned about how simple it would be to mess with individual electronic voting booths.
It would be very easy for someone to put a piece of malware on this type of device, especially if these cards are not encrypted. And while they're voting, manipulate the card to either plant embedded code on one of these devices or multiply the number of votes they're actually submitting.
There's no evidence any such rigging has ever taken place, but at least 4 states, including Illinois, have had their voter registration rolls targeted or scanned.
We're highly confident that nothing was added, nothing was deleted, nothing was altered.
But officials are concerned the scanning by hackers in Russia or elsewhere may have been just a preparation for today.
There have been a variety of scanning activities, which is a preamble for potential intrusion activities.
And security experts say the aim could be to cause confusion, hitting targets other than the voting systems themselves.
Organizations could hack into a social media system, could begin posting inaccurate or misleading information regarding the election, trying to undermine confidence in our election system.
U.S. officials say they have sent word to the Russians in, quote, the strongest way we know how, that any attempt to attack the U.S. election system today will have the harshest consequences.
But can they actually do anything to stop these cyber attacks?
Well, they actually can. They're on a patrol right now at the Department of Homeland Security headquarters. They can shut down attacks from overseas. They can shut down the lines. They can blacklist known addresses that are trying to attack into the system.
And Brian, how about security in general?
Very high, especially here in New York with both candidates here outside Trump Tower this morning. Trucks lining the outside to guard against crowds coming or possible bomb blasts. Very heavy security.
All right, Brian.
Tonight, shockwaves across America and around the world as Donald Trump defies the polls and the pundits again. A dramatic triumph as the brash billionaire turned reality star is elected the 45th president of the United States.
I say it is time for us to come together as one united people.
For Hillary Clinton, one of the most stunning defeats in American political history.
Last night, I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country.
The candidate and her campaign so confident victory was in their grasp. What happened?
Hours later, Trump sat across from the Director of National Intelligence and the heads of the FBI, CIA, and NSA as they presented their explosive report, concluding, quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Parts of that report declassified tonight say Russia aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. After the meeting, Trump releasing a statement conceding Russia, China, and others are consistently trying to hack a variety of American institutions, including the DNC, but still not publicly accepting Russia's interference in the election. Trump saying there was absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election, including the fact that there was no tampering whatsoever with voting machines. The investigation opening deep wounds between Trump and the intelligence community.
There's a difference between skepticism and disparagement.
But in what is perhaps an olive branch, Trump now calling his meeting with intelligence leaders constructive.
And so let's get right to Cecilia Vega live at Trump Tower tonight. And Cecilia, the president-elect now says that he's ordered an immediate review of how the U.S. can combat cyber attacks.
David, he says he's going to appoint an advisory team to give him that information, how to combat these cyber attacks within 90 days of taking office. David.
Cecilia Vega with us again tonight. Cecilia, thank you. And it was President Obama, of course, who commissioned that intelligence report. The president now weighing in during an exclusive interview late today with our George Stephanopoulos.
Bottom line this time, Vladimir Putin got what he wanted.
Well, look, I think that what is true is that the Russians intended to meddle, and they meddled. I'll be honest with you, George, and they meddled. I'll be honest with you, George.
Well, by now you've heard that the CIA is sure that Russia did hack the DNC and John Podesta's emails with the intent of swaying the election toward Donald Trump. And predictably, here's how some politicians have responded.
The Russians are not our friends. It defies belief that somehow Republicans in the Senate are reluctant to either review Russian tactics or ignore them.
Our men and women in the intelligence community who gather and assess intelligence are very careful and very deliberate, and if they weren't, they wouldn't be in the positions that they occupy.
There's one fundamental issue that everyone is missing. The claim is that Russia decided to hack the election not by altering voting results, but by making public actual emails from the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Look, I have said this before, and I will say it again. How bizarre is it that the argument is not that the Russians were trying to influence the election through lies or electronic voting, but rather the claim, if you really boil it down, is that the Russians swayed the election for Donald Trump by revealing the truth about the Clinton campaign and the truth about the DNC. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that on Twitter.
Breaking at this hour, and after weeks of taking aim at the U.S. intelligence community, President-elect Donald Trump in the same room with those very intelligence officials, being briefed on their investigation into Russia's hacking of the U.S. election. Just hours before that briefing today, Mr. Trump calling it a, quote, political witch hunt.